Greetings and happy Halloween, everyone. This is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, and I'm back to bring you another episode review from Season 8 of The Loud House. So let's get right into it. Today's episode is Close Encounters of the Nerd Kind. It's Halloween, and while Lincoln and pals go around Royal Woods collecting candy, they notice a bunch of strange occurrences, including the mysterious disappearance of some of the townsfolk. Meanwhile, the rest of the Loud family set up a haunted house with some very disappointing results. However, they too end up disappearing when they're abducted by yellow alien creatures, and it's up to Lincoln and his friends to save the day. This episode is very unique because not only is this the first 1 hour long special since Schooled all the way back in Season 5, but this is also the first holiday-themed episode to be longer than the usual runtime of 22 minutes. Anyway, I'll start this review by saying this was, for the most part, a fun episode. When it came to the characters, the visuals, the action, and the story itself, this was, by Loud House standards, an epic adventure, although there are some negatives regarding those aspects that I will be addressing in the video. Now I'm sure someone is going to make the obvious complaint about how this was another example of the show steering away from its original slice of lifestyle and diving into the realm of fantasy, but honestly, this kind of episode shouldn't even be surprising by this point. In this universe, ghosts have been proven to be real, zombies can be summoned and start walking around, so the fact aliens can now suddenly exist doesn't sound all that crazy when you really stop and think about it. Just look at how alien stuff was handled in episodes like A Stellar Performance and you'll see what I mean. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack here with this Halloween special, so let's not waste any more time. My first positive would be the characters, and I'll start specifically with Lincoln and his friends. This is undoubtedly one of my favorite adventures starring them, and you'll see why as I go along. The story begins with the Freckle gang going trick-or-treating as characters from their favorite sci-fi movie, Planet Protection Patrol, aka the show's version of Guardians of the Galaxy. Liam's character Trunk, being an obvious nod to Groot, was a dead giveaway. Eventually, they run into Chandler and Trent, who make fun of them, which is pretty much what Lynn Jr. said was going to happen to them if they went outside dressed as members of Triple P. Then Chandler takes Zach's cosmic communicator, basically a juiced-up looking egg beater, and sends a message to the supposed aliens he thinks are not real, even though the audience can see sound waves emitting from the device. This is what we call foreshadowing. Quick side note regarding this egg beater and all the other makeshift gadgets and alien DNA experiments used in this episode. They may seem very campy and very cartoonish, but the fact Zach and his parents were able to turn something as simple as a photo booth into a fully functional teleportation machine just proves how intelligent and dedicated they are. So perhaps they aren't as insane as most people would normally think. I mean, they were sort of proven right about the existence of aliens at the end of Zack Attack, even though it was really Flip flying the spaceship. But this time they're dealing with actual aliens and using alien hunting technology that actually works and therefore validates their supposed craziness. Conspiracy theorists 2 points, naysayers 0. Anyway, the Freckle gang go to Cheryl and Meryl's apartment, and even though they get their candy, the apartment is completely deserted with some kind of yellow goo scattered around. They notice the same substance when they realize how Flip wasn't at the Food and Fuel, and when they discover Trent's boots not long after the latter says Chandler also vanished without a trace. Following the results of a test tube experiment with the goo and finding more of it at an empty Loud House along with a picture Lenny took when she and her parents opened the front door, it is confirmed that aliens were indeed responsible for everyone's collective disappearance. So the kids try to find the aliens, but how do they know where they're going to show up next? Wherever they see flickering streetlights, that's how. Speaking of the aliens, I really like their designs. They weren't depicted with the typical green or gray colors and walking on two legs like a human as you would normally see in media, so having them depicted with gelatin-like bodies and tentacles was something a little different. Think Kang and Kodos, but more cartoony and lemon-flavored. I also liked how they had these belts with a little dial that can be used to switch between languages. Not many alien characters I know of have this little feature, so I give the writers a point here for creativity. Now, speaking of creativity, another one of my positives would be the action sequences. This also ties into my comments about the main characters, and visually speaking, the action is very engaging. In a way, it was kinda nice seeing these kids being super committed to their costumes by role-playing as their respective characters for what was supposed to be a simple night of Halloween fun. Their dedication, role-playing, and knowledge of the movie from which their costumes were inspired proved to be a big help when they ended up having to play their character roles for real, or at least somewhat, when there was legitimate danger happening around them. Just watch lights, camera, nuclear reaction, and you'll see what I'm getting at with the whole playing a fictional character but this time it's for real scenario. In fact, the kids get the last laugh over the Loud Sisters when they mocked the costume-wearing sci-fi nerds at the beginning. These so-called bully magnets ended up becoming heroes and saving everyone's lives, and they got a well-deserved apology from those who initially put them down. Gotta love it when a character is vindicated and makes the haters eat their words by the story's end. But yes, the scenes with Triple P taking on the aliens both on the street and on their spaceship were pretty cool. They knew just what they had to do when it came to physical confrontation, and they worked together to free everyone from their containment pods. A little crazy seeing juiced up hair dryers being used as laser guns? Maybe. But does it hit the right notes when it comes to standard cartoon action? Definitely, but that's just my take. Even the sequence where the kids had to take command of the spaceship was kinda cool, and trying to keep the ship from crashing was pretty epic in both visual and tone. One thing I really enjoyed was how Lincoln's friends took control of the mission when the usual man with a plan made the earlier sacrifice by allowing himself to get captured in order to save Clyde from getting captured. Not only was Lincoln's sacrifice a very honorable reflection of the movie character he was dressed as, but seeing someone other than him leading the charge was such a welcoming change of pace. So maybe all that talk about needing to stick together or everything falls apart mentality is just a bunch of crap. So all in all, I can't really complain about Lincoln and pals and how they were handled in this episode. They had their moments, both comedically and dramatically speaking, and they had an epic real-life adventure based on their favorite movie. Chandler and his performance, on the other hand, well, him being a jerk is nothing new. He was abducted by a bunch of aliens and was still rude and ungrateful to Lincoln and his friends even though they just saved his life, even feeling the need to refer to Lincoln as a lame-o during the landing of the spaceship. He then tried to pin all the blame on Triple P for being the ones responsible for the alien invasion/abductions. However, the aliens play back the recorded transmission Chandler made earlier, proving that he was the one who started the whole mess, leading to everyone shaming him for what he had done. Then Chandler falls out of the spaceship and gets stuck in Lucy's gigantic spider web. Not the most amazing punishment, but it was still satisfying to see. I even liked how Clyde really wanted to help Trent even though the latter is usually a jerk to him and his friends. Everyone could see Trent was legitimately concerned about Chandler's disappearance, and honestly, Trent came off as a lot more sympathetic than you'd normally expect under regular circumstances. It goes to show that when he's not around such a negative influence like Chandler, Trent can be a pretty nice guy. As for the other characters, there's really not a whole lot I can say about them, this being especially true for Cheryl, Meryl, and Flip. The main purpose for those three was to be used as victims of the alien abduction and to offer some exposition on what was happening on board the spaceship after Flip was kicked off of it. The rest of the Loud family are pretty much in the same victim category, except they had a little more going for them compared to the others. They had some significance to the story, just not as much as I would have liked, but I'll talk more about my critiques about that later. Another one of my positives would be the pacing of the story. Unlike Schooled, where it had 4 separate but somewhat connected stories, and how the episode kept jumping from one plot to another with either too much or too little time devoted to each one, which slowed down the narrative in certain places, Close Encounters is a lot snappier in its storytelling and more focused with only one main plot and one minor subplot. Lincoln and pals dealing with aliens as the main story, and the Loud family having a haunted house as the secondary. Both plots are tied together when the family is abducted by the aliens, and if it hadn't been for Lucy's idea to aim the ship towards her giant spiderweb to lessen the impact of the crash, who knows what would have happened. Then everything is officially wrapped up when the family asks the aliens to take part in their haunted house when their earlier attempts to scare Darcy completely failed. Respectively and collectively speaking, each plot has a mostly satisfying payoff that involved the aliens, and everyone came out as a winner, minus Chandler, of course. I'm really glad they didn't pull off some cliche gotcha style ending where it turns out the aliens were fake and the invasion was all part of some elaborate prank set up by any one of the other characters. That and the "it was all a dream" ending would have been way too cheap of a payoff. Perhaps the best thing about the way the episode's 2 plots are set up and later connected to each other is how they're written. Compared to Schooled, where each of the 4 stories could have easily worked as their own individual episodes despite all of them being somewhat connected in the long run, Close Encounters presents their 2 plots in a way where one couldn't work without the other. The A plot would be too long to be condensed into a runtime of 22 minutes, and the B plot would be too short to make a regular 10-minute episode. A 3-minute short, maybe, but not a standard episode. I mean, I guess you could shorten the A-plot by making a few script revisions and taking a few things out, like the random and very eccentric Mrs. Bernardo, where she's running around like a maniac advertising her new one-woman improv show. I mean, it was funny, but it didn't add anything to the story. However, if you were to make revisions, you'd almost certainly have to cut out a good portion of the action scenes, and the final result would come off as kinda rushed and less dramatic. Plus, you'd almost have to completely remove the B-plot, and the Loud family barely have any screen time in this episode as it is. Additionally, the possibility of writing out the Loud family would mean you'd also be writing out Lucy, the character whose quick thinking stopped the spaceship from crashing into the ground. Yeah, I know you could rewrite a few things to get the same result without Lucy, but why take a huge portion of the spotlight away from the one character who never gets the leading role in any Halloween-related special? You know, the kind of character you would expect to be the main star of an episode focusing on the spookiest holiday of the year? As of Season 8, Lucy is now 3 for 3 on getting the relatively short end of the stick in terms of screen time in an episode dedicated to Halloween, and that's really disappointing in my opinion. With that in mind, let's talk about some of the negatives of the episode. Although I do see the positives to some of the characters, the writing, and the story overall, there are some negatives to each of these components that I believe are worth pointing out. The first thing would be some character presentations that are not consistent with past portrayals. The most notable one is regarding Lucy. It's not so much the fact she's running a haunted house instead of a haunted corn maze as we saw in Tricked, and how this isn't even the first time they've done a haunted house for Halloween with the exact same setup and costumes. Yeah, apparently this haunted house is something the family has been doing for a few years now. Meh, I don't really buy it, but whatever it takes to set the story in motion. Anyway, the biggest detriment is how the plot completely ignores a very important aspect of Lucy's character that the series rarely ever shies away from when it comes to most spooky themed episodes. Despite her character's knowledge and skills on what it takes to make anything scary, as we've seen in the 2 previous Halloween specials, Lucy doesn't implement any of her usual methods to make her haunted house truly terrifying. I mean, visually, her designs for the haunted house look scary, but they're very ineffective when tested out on others. We've seen Lucy with a book containing all kinds of dark magic and creepy spells, and she can summon actual ghosts. But shockingly, she does none of that in this episode, and honestly, it's no wonder the fear levels of her haunted house were so low. It's one thing for Lincoln not to be scared because he's probably used to the yearly jump scares, but the fact no one could scare a little kid like Darcy is really perplexing. Then again, much like Lincoln pointing out how it's the same routine every year and they never try anything different, trick-or-treaters are probably used to the haunted house, and maybe that's why it's not as scary as the Louds want it to be. So yeah, this episode felt like a downgrade for Lucy's character because it's hard to believe she couldn't scare anyone by any means when there's plenty of past evidence to prove that she can. This episode was dabbling with fantasy elements by having actual aliens, and previous episodes have embraced fantasy elements relating to the supernatural plenty of times. So why would Lucy not invoke the fantasy card in this episode by using some witchcraft to spice things up when the audience already knows she's more than capable of doing so? She's never had a problem breaking out the dark magic before, so why didn't she use it here? Seriously, she could have fixed her problem with the haunted house by casting a few spells or using more organic means of creating a spooky atmosphere, and her family's conflict would have been resolved in a matter of minutes. I feel like this complete disregard for this very specific part of Lucy's character was simply done for plot convenience just so the aliens could come in and fix everything when they objectively didn't have to. I know the series sometimes needs to tone down on fantasy elements from time to time, but why not take advantage of those elements in an episode where such elements would actually be useful? There was no reason for Lucy to be this incompetent at running a haunted house when we already know her character is an expert at scaring people and has the means of making it happen. Speaking of scared characters, Lynn Sr. is also depicted inconsistently. In Tricked, he was absolutely terrified of Halloween and wanted to avoid the scary festivities at all costs. Lucy asks her dad why he's so calm when she normally expects him to be scared and hiding from all the spooky stuff. Well, apparently the reason for this sudden shift in his character is that he gets to be in a giant costume with Rita the whole time. To an extent, I would have been willing to believe that if they didn't show a flashback of the parents dressed up as an undead bride and groom with Lynn Sr. not freaking himself out, so that's a double inconsistency. Then again, Lin Sr. didn't appear to be against the idea of dressing up as a scarecrow for Halloween many years ago, so at this point the hyper-paranoia he experiences around the month of October is only relevant to the story if it needs to be used for the sake of comedy. Then there's the explanation of why the aliens came to the Royal Woods and started capturing people. To be honest, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to find their characters and motivations to be bad or just incredibly stupid and weird. Maybe it's a mix of all three, but who the hell knows. Anyway, they explain how they were traveling through space when their ship started running low on fuel. They get the transmission from Chandler in Royal Woods and decide to go to Earth to start snatching up humans as a power source. Apparently, humans make great batteries and therefore can be used to power their ship. It should be noted that the ship would power down if it's not connected to a power source, and that's demonstrated by the characters when the kids freed everyone from their containment pods. It makes you wonder why they didn't do the smart thing and try to get everyone back inside those pods like Lola tried to do, especially if it meant landing the ship safely and avoiding a meteor shower. Oh, right, creating intensity for plot convenience. Now I remember. Anyway, the aliens were able to easily infiltrate the Earth because the humans were wearing disguises, i.e. Halloween costumes, so they were able to blend in with everyone without looking too out of the ordinary. Not sure how believable that is, but whatever. This is where things get, well, kinda weird. On the surface, these aliens did appear to be evil when they were abducting and attacking humans, but the way they interacted with the kids on their ship made them out to be not as evil as you'd think. I'd be more inclined to believe they were being misunderstood by Triple P, and allow me to expand upon that. In their eyes, these aliens didn't think they were doing anything wrong, and they thought the kids were the villains trying to hurt them, therefore attacking the kids as a means of self-defense. Of course, everything turned out to be a big misunderstanding, and by the end, the aliens didn't seem so evil. But even though these aliens don't take the more stereotypical approach like having a desire to conquer the Earth, their motivation for abducting humans is still very strange, and it does lean towards the side of villainy in the eyes of the humans and the audience. First and foremost, if their ship was running low on energy and they were going to use humans as a power source anyway, wouldn't they have invaded the Earth even if Chandler didn't send them a transmission practically inviting them to Royal Woods? Given how quickly they were able to snatch up the humans, and knowing the humans would have no way of fighting back, Lincoln and Powers being the exception, conducting an invasion on Halloween because of the whole easily blending in with humans in costumes reasoning doesn't make all that much sense. It being Halloween and lots of people dressing up for the holiday is kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. These aliens could have invaded any area at any given time of the year if their ship was low on energy, and nothing would have changed in terms of their original plan to use humans as batteries. It's more of a coincidence that they chose to target Royal Woods on Halloween simply because that's the place and time their ship received Chandler's transmission, and knowing they needed a power source ASAP. Plus, if these aliens were only going to use humans to power their ship, wouldn't they technically be leading their victims to a slow demise? I mean, batteries don't last forever, and I'm sure these humans would have eventually run out of juice, if you know what I'm saying. Capturing humans and using them until their energy runs out does cross the line into being a villain. Would the aliens have found a way to keep everyone alive? I doubt it, considering the fact they more or less said they've done this sort of thing to humans before. So yeah, I have reason to believe they would have discarded everyone's lifeless bodies once they sucked all the energy out of them. This is where my appreciation for these aliens starts to hit a snag. They don't come off as intentionally evil in how they behave and speak, and they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. Hell, they got so excited about Halloween that they decided they were going to bring those traditions back to their home planet. But at the same time, their actions when fighting the Freckle Gang and what they wanted to do to Lincoln's family and neighbors makes them look like villains despite being somewhat good-natured near the end of the story. Like I said, I don't know if I'm supposed to hate these characters or think of them as merely misunderstood. I'm really on the fence about it, so I'll just say they're both right and wrong for different reasons. Regardless, the humans are freed, and despite the aliens saying they were ready to be destroyed upon being defeated, according to intergalactic law, everyone decides to forgive and forget the whole ordeal. I appreciate the surface level heartwarming sentiment, but I don't think I'd be that forgiving if I had to go through what the human characters went through. Lisa agrees to build them a human-free power source for their spaceship, and the story ends with everyone being on good terms. I I guess the only other things left to talk about would be a few minor points of interest. I thought the costumes worn by all the characters were pretty neat, some a little more outlandish than others. Also, pay attention to the costumes worn by Luna and Lucy. One time Luna was dressed as a skeleton and Lucy was dressed as a zombie. In this episode, their costume choices are reversed, so that's a neat little eye catcher. Speaking of Luna, I like the part where it turned out she was playing the organ while Lincoln was on the phone with his mom, when you're originally supposed to believe it was just random music the characters are not supposed to hear. I don't know if that's considered a fourth wall break, but if it was definitely a clever way of making literal background music. We also had some cameos from a few minor characters, such as Darcy dressed as a pirate and Officer Schaffer from Rita Her Rights. Despite being a less than effective police officer, she does have a fun side when it's revealed she's also a fan of Planet Protection Patrol, even though she and her coworker think the kids are just pretending about the whole alien abduction thing. What's even weirder is that towards the end, Schaffer believes the aliens are just costumes even though she gets trapped inside their goo, so maybe it's characters like her that made the case for why these extraterrestrials could easily get around town without raising any suspicions. It is kinda strange seeing this police officer, of all people, dressed in a costume, but hey, fans come in all ages, so that's something. And finally, if you listen carefully, you'll hear Lincoln refer to his home address as 1216 Franklin Street, but it's supposed to be Franklin Avenue. I don't know what it is about this episode and its list of inconsistencies from past seasons, but how someone in the writer's room could mess up on something like this after all this time is a big head scratcher. I mean, it said Avenue on the ship's control panel, so at least the animators got it right. Overall, this episode has its share of strengths and weaknesses, and when you combine everything together, it evens out to being slightly better than okay. It has some fun standout moments, but the negatives prevent it from getting a rating above an 8 out of 10, although it did have the potential of being so. Still, even with all the negatives, it's not enough for me to say it's terrible either. Most of the characters were presented very well, the pacing and storytelling were fine in most areas, the action and intensity were impressive, the tone had the right balance of being scary and dramatic, and the payoff at the end was good enough. From inconsistent character portrayals to head-tilting logic when it came to the aliens' motivations, moments with the Freckle gang and their intergalactic adventure were able to make up for some of the episode's shortcomings. Obviously, this Halloween special will never be as good or as memorable as Tricked. The latter will always be my favorite for reasons I already laid out in the review I made for it. In terms of writing for a 1 hour long special and storyline payoffs, Close Encounters is much better than both Schooled and the second Halloween episode, Great Lakes Freakout. And yes, before anyone asks, my scores for those two episodes have changed since I first reviewed them in 2020 and 2022 respectively. My new score for Schooled is 6.8 out of 10 and 6.7 out of 10 for Great Lakes. So as far as I'm concerned, this Halloween special is still fun to watch. If you're a fan of alien or space-related adventures, I'd recommend giving this one a go. It's not perfect, and you may be one of those fans who may not be all too fond of fantasy elements, but once you look past all of that and watch it for what it is and what it's about, you'll get some satisfaction. Your results may vary, but that's just my opinion. With that said, I give Close Encounters of the Nerd Kind a 7.6 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of Close Encounters of the Nerd Kind. So I gotta ask, what did you guys think of this episode? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Happy Halloween. Yes. Anyway, peace out, home slices.